What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson, and we have something to discuss today. We have to go to the defense of one of our favorite New York Giants players, friend of the show, friend of the podcast, had an appearance on the show last offseason. You guys know him, you guys love him, Bobby Okereke, who we think is one of the best inside linebackers in the NFL. Well, according to the ESPN rankings done by polling together the opinions of a ton of NFL executives, coaches, and scouts, he's apparently not a top 10 linebacker in the league. PFF had him as a top 10 linebacker in the league, but this latest ESPN ranking, he wasn't even in the top 10, nor the honorable mentions for the top 10. Mind-boggling as it is, we do need to react to that, and we do need to come to the defense of Bobby Okereke, who I think is one of the most versatile linebackers and dependable linebackers in the NFL, and he also happens to suit up for the New York Giants. So we're going to go ahead and discuss this, kind of unpack what went wrong in this ESPN ranking and why we feel like Bobby Okereke objectively is a top 10 off-ball linebacker in the NFL. But before we dive into all that, make sure to leave a like if you do enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And what is your reaction to Bobby Okereke? Again, not only ranking outside of the top 10, but not even in the honorable mentions on this top 10 list.
I'm doing pretty good, and listen, this has to be the worst list I've ever seen. It's almost like they forgot about this guy. Straight up, I'm going to read you the list, and I'm going to give you some stats, and you're going to be like, how do they forget about Bobby Okereke? Because that's really what this list looks like. It looks like they just forgot he existed. So the list starts off with, of course, Fred Warner, who objectively is number one. That's not even a question. Roquan Smith is number two. We can agree with that. They have Matt Milano at number 3. I would agree with that. I think Matt Milano is an absolute monster. I know he got injured last year, but he is elite pretty much in every respect. Here's where things get a little interesting for me. Number 4, they have Patrick Queen, who's now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Good player. I don't think he's the best player. I mean, he was on the Ravens, and Roquan Smith was the guy there, right? Like, he was that guy before, of course, he was with Chicago, then goes to the Ravens. I mean, he was the man, and Patrick Queen was playing a secondary role. And they're listing him as the number 4. So you're telling me that the Ravens have the top, 2 of the top 4 linebackers in the game. I agree with Roquan Smith. I do not agree with Patrick Queen whatsoever. Then you have Nick Bolton, which is like probably the worst place that you could put Nick Bolton. I mean, he played 700 snaps last year. He had less tackles, a higher missed tackle percentage, had fewer pressures than Bobby Okereke, who played every single snap last season for the Giants. Now, Nick Bolton had 75 tackles, 12 pressures, 10.5% missed tackle rate, 473 yards, and gave up 3 touchdowns. Now, keep in mind, he only played in 708 snaps, whereas Okereke played 1,128, 20 pressures, 105 tackles, 7.7% missed tackle rate, gave up only 301 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and had 5 pass breakups and 2 interceptions. I mean, just looking at the stats alone, he was better than Nick Bolton, and it really wasn't even close. Not to mention, he's one of the key communicators on that defense. Now, you have Steve Spagnuolo, who we're very familiar with, amazing defensive coordinator. They had really good cornerbacks and a really good pass rush with Chris Jones and whatnot. So their scheme, they're barely on the football field because of Patrick Mahomes. But Bobby Okereke was asked to do a lot on this defense, mainly because the Giants' offense was unsustainable. They were horrible, and the defense was on the field a lot. And Okereke stepped up and played some of the best football, if not the best football, in his entire career. I mean, just based on the stats alone, Bobby Okereke is a better player than Nick Bolton. So already we're at number 5 here, and I think Okereke should be where Nick Bolton is. Then you have Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who's a solid player, good in coverage, but was inconsistent last year. He's a freak athlete. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a very solid player, but he has a lot of growing to do. Then you have Tremaine Edmonds, who stepped up and had a kind of a rebound year with the Chicago Bears. Really solid, 6'5", 250-pound guy. It's a massive linebacker, really solid player too. And then you have Demario Davis, who's older but still very solid. I just don't think any of these guys were better than Bobby Okereke last year. I'll let you get your take here. Starting at number 5 with Nick Bolton, from that list on, I don't see how any of those guys are better than Bobby Okereke, whose stats were tremendous, elite, Pro Bowl caliber. You could argue all pro caliber, if not for guys like Roquan Smith, and of course Fred Warner. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Fred Warner, I think, is the number one linebacker in the NFL. I don't think there's much debating that. But with Bobby Okereke ranking outside the top 10 and not in the honorable mentions, again, I do have to note that he did rank inside the top 10 on PFF's linebacker rankings. You mentioned Nick Bolton as being someone that you don't think deserved to be ahead of Okereke. Neither does PFF. He ranked number 14. They had Okereke at 10 in front of Tremaine Edmonds, Quincy Williams, Jermaine Pratt, Nick Bolton, Drew Tranquill, and some other players. The Jacksonville Jaguars linebacker, whose name I don't know how to pronounce either, he's inside the top 10 on ESPN's list, but not on PFF's list. And I do think it's interesting to differentiate between these two lists because PFF is using data from their own website and their own writer is using that data to inform who should be in the top 10. It's a little bit different here with this ESPN list because they are doing a survey with a bunch of NFL executives, coaches, and scouts. So guys within the league not giving Bobby Okereke his credit and respect. And this isn't the first time that this has happened, Alex, because remember during the regular season, we were talking about what a year Okereke is having. He should be a Pro Bowler. He should even be an All-Pro. I don't think he made either of those teams. He wasn't a Pro Bowler, and he wasn't an All-Pro. How did that happen with the stat line that he put together? And not only just the stat line, but watch the games, watch the way that he plays, watch how important he was to that Giants defense that led the NFL in turnovers, tied with the Baltimore Ravens. So I think that Okereke is one of those players who just doesn't get the attention he deserves, and unfortunately, it's because he plays for a bad football team. The Giants were really bad last year. They went 6-11. People weren't really watching them. A lot of fans tuned out. Definitely fans across the NFL, non-Giants fans, were not watching this team because they were not enjoyable to put on your television screen, right? The Giants just were a bad team. And because of that, I think Bobby Okereke flew under the radar. He didn't get picked up by a lot of media attention, and unfortunately, now he's one of the most underrated players in the NFL. PFF had this to say about him: a career-high 78.9 PFF grade, the highest, the best of Okereke's career. His first with the Giants, 2019 third-round draft pick, ranked 9th at the position with an 82.5 PFF coverage grade, and he was one of the surest tacklers in the league, missing just 7.7% of his attempts. When you combine those stats that PFF puts out there with the fact that he played 100% of defensive snaps this past season, it's really hard not to put this guy in your top 10 rankings, in my opinion. But for some reason, again, Alex, these people who were voting on this list are people within the NFL. They don't view him as a top 10 player at his position. Why do you think that might be? Because kind of like I mentioned, the NFL media at large probably didn't see a whole lot of Bobby Okereke. Giants fans, they were still watching the games. Fans outside of the Giants fan base, not watching Giants games last season. They were not fun to watch. So the media at large probably didn't get enough exposure to the greatness of Bobby Okereke. But those in the league, the NFL executives, the scouts, the players, the coaches, those guys should know who's on the field and who's playing well, right? So why do you think it is that his play didn't resonate with those within the league, and why maybe they weren't able to give him the credit and attention that he deserves?
I mean, the attention and credit he deserves, probably because, like you just said, we're the Giants, right? Nobody really cares about us. Nobody really is looking at us saying, oh, this is a great team. Look at all the people on this list right now, right? You look at Fred Warner, he's on the 49ers. You look at Matt Milano, he's on the Bills. You look at Raquan Smith, he's on the Ravens. You look at Patrick Queen, he's on the Steelers now, but was on the Ravens. Nick Bolton, the Chiefs. The Browns who had an elite defense last year. The Bears who are on the up and up. A lot of these players are on really, really good teams. And the Giants are one of the worst teams in football. How do you put a top 10 linebacker or a guy that should be in the top 10 if he's on one of the worst defenses and teams in football? Look, I just think that Okereke is a really great player on a pretty bad team right now. Of course, we'll see what happens this season. Things could turn in a much different direction. But they gave him a lot of responsibility last year. Patrick Queen wasn't even the mic of that defense in Baltimore. It was Roquan Smith. So Patrick Queen's role was not to communicate. It was to be that secondary off-ball linebacker. Bobby Okereke's role was to stop the run, play zone coverage, play some man when asked, and really communicate the entire, strategy to the Giants defense from the sideline, from Wink Martindale. I just don't see how Okereke is not getting his credit because he's earned every single ounce of it. The guy played every single snap last year. He had a broken pinky, he had a fractured rib. Like, he played through every single injury you could ask, and he did it while the team was losing games, right? It was a bad team, and he still went out there and performed and played at a very high level despite all the injuries that he had. I mean, we talked to him. You remember, he is a leader of men. This guy is a very smart person, a really intelligent guy. And, not only that, but he's super confident. He comes from a great background. I really think that this guy should be appreciated a lot more. It's one of the best deals in free agency we've signed in a very long time, and I say that proudly. Like Bobby Okereke on a 4-year, $40 million deal, absolute steal. And now going into his second season with the Giants, coming off the year he just had, in a Shane Bowen defense that a lot of people are saying is simple, right? They're saying Wink Martindale's defense was crazy, sub packages, this, that, it was all, bells and whistles. Shane Bowen's defense is straightforward. It's rush the passer with your front four and play good defense on the back end, stop the run. Your secondary there'll be a lot of pressure taken off your secondary if you have an elite pass rush. That's kind of what Joe Shane said in the last episode of Hard Knocks. They wouldn't get Brian Burns. Now the secondary kind of has a little bit more of that protection because the pass rush is going to hit home so much faster now. They won't have to stay in coverage for much longer. So I do think that will be a major benefit, and Bobby Okereke will have a lot more at his disposal. They'll stop the run. They'll make the opposing offenses one-dimensional, and that allows you to cut their playbook in half. So I do think that right now this Giants team has a really solid group of defenders, right? Like Bobby Okereke, of course, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Deontay Banks. That is a really nice core five of players. And I still think that Jason Pinnock is really solid. We'll see what Tyler Nubin does and who wins those cornerback jobs in the slot and the CB2. But, I just think that Okereke's communication is underrated variable. His 7.7% missed tackle rate was the lowest in his career. He had the second highest tackle totals in his career, the highest amount of pressures, highest amount of sacks, highest amount of hurries. Like he had career year last season. The 5 pass breakups was also a career high. I just don't see how he's not getting his respect personally. I mean, Nick Bolton, yeah, he won a Super Bowl because Patrick Mahomes was amazing, right? It wasn't Nick Bolton who won. I think of like other players on the team like L'Jarius Sneed and Chris Jones on the Chiefs. When I think about their defense, Nick Bolton's not the first guy that comes to mind. When I think about this defense, I think about Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, and Bobby Okereke as the primary players there. Like he is one of those guys that comes to the forefront of your mind. Nick Bolton, great player, don't get me wrong, but he's not the one that stands out to me as like the one that changed everything for the Chiefs. Without Bobby Okereke, this defense is a joke, right? The Giants defense is an absolute joke. They need a player like this. This is the first time they've had like a truly elite linebacker in terms of production since Antonio Pierce. Like Blake Martinez was fine for a couple years, a lot of good tackles, but the guy could not cover. So, this is a guy, Bobby Okereke, that has pride in his coverage qualities, has pride in stopping the run, pride in rushing the passer when called upon to do so. And he's extremely good at communicating, and his IQ is really, really high. This one really got under my skin and got on my nerves because I feel like he deserves this recognition. And because he's on the Giants, maybe that's why he's not getting it.
I think that's the only explanation as to why he's not getting the recognition that he deserves. At least we're giving him the recognition we have to. Bobby Okereke, man, listen, such a versatile player. Not only is he smart, tough, dependable, which the Giants are always preaching. He's on the field for every snap last season. But he makes an impact as a run defender, as a cover man, and even a little bit as a pass rusher. He had a career high with 2.5 sacks last season as well. The way that Wink Martindale used Bobby Okereke was basically, we need a play defensively. Bobby Okereke is making that play. He pretty much built the entire game plan throughout the season around Okereke, and that's not easy to do. That's not easy to take on as a player, as a team captain in your first season with the team, as a team leader, and as the guy who's receiving the plays into your headset or from the headset into your helmet. Okereke stepping into that role his first year with the team was very impressive, and I actually think there's only more to grow here, right? Okereke was as good as he was last season, but now in a new defensive scheme with Shane Bowen and entering his second year in New York, so maybe a little bit more comfortable with the players around him and with the environment of playing in the Big Apple, I think that we could see an even better year from Bobby Okereke, and hopefully in 2025 when they do this list again, Bobby Okereke isn't only in the top 10, maybe he'll be in the top 5. That's what I'm hoping for, because I do think he's one of the most talented linebackers in the NFL, and I also think he's one of the best people in the NFL, just speaking with him and watching the way that he operates with the rest of the media and everybody that he's ever spoken to publicly on camera. Okereke is just one of those guys that you want to root for and you want to see succeed, and I can't wait to see him do that this upcoming season. But I guess my closing thoughts on this are that not only is Okereke a very good linebacker, should have been top 10 in this rankings in my opinion, I also do think that the Giants have a very underrated linebacker core. They didn't rank very highly in PFF. PFF did a ranking of all the team's different units around the league. They didn't rank near the top in linebacker rankings, but I honestly think they should have because I also do believe that Micah McFadden is a very good player in his own right, and for the role that he plays, the rotational kind of lesser role that Isaiah Simmons plays, the Giants have a pretty solid group of 3 linebackers that could start on any given team here with Okereke, McFadden, and Isaiah Simmons. Alex, how do you feel about that? Do you kind of agree with me? Maybe you think not the best unit, room for improvement. I really like Micah McFadden. I think he's a damn good player. I'm not saying he's a top tier number 1 linebacker on every team, but as your second option in the linebacker unit, your second starter, that's a really good second starter. Young player who's still growing, still developing, and has upside. And then you throw Isaiah Simmons into the mix as your coverage linebacker in nickel personnel packages. It's a pretty good unit, and it's one of the units that I actually feel confident in for the Giants going into 2024.
Look, I actually maybe one of the few people that like Micah McFadden. And the reason I like Micah McFadden is because he does something very unique in that he is uber aggressive. Now, he misses a lot of tackles, but it's because he's in the backfield in like the blink of an eye, and he's just like a second too late, like a millisecond too late. Sometimes sometimes he just can't clean up those tackles. But I'll tell you this: when you're disrupting flow in the backfield and you're getting into that space and you're slowing down a runner and you're causing them to change direction, think about what that does for the rest of the defense. It allows them to ride to the football. If you're not running full speed as a running back, you're not hitting that hole, at the pace that you need to get to the second level. If you're delaying that reaction, your interior presence can now move up and make a nice stop and limit yardage gained. So McFadden, in terms of stopping the run, his north to south qualities are really, really good. Like, he's excellent in that regard. Now, he's a bit of a stockier guy, not the best lateral agility, but I think that when it comes to rushing the passer, the guy can run full speed and just knock an offensive lineman over. He can get through those gaps. He's extremely reactive. That is a skill. You know what I mean? It's very much a skill to be able to react at that level and have that type of speed to get into the backfield. I just think he has to clean up a couple things, take better angles sometimes. I think sometimes his angles lead to him not being able to finish off plays. But if he can just tweak those angles and anticipate, where that player is going to be, he gets into the backfield so fast that he's able to make these plays as sometimes they slip through his hands. Now, you're not going to trust Micah McFadden in coverage. He's not the best guy in coverage. You really want him stopping the run. You want Okereke being more of that a conservative player and helping in coverage, but also stepping up and filling those gaps in the run game. But letting McFadden be that aggressor, like let McFadden plug those gaps and fire through the gaps, and then have Okereke there to clean them up if he misses the tackle. Like, that's kind of how I envision the Giants, deploying those two guys, but. Look, it's always nice to have like a Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen combination, but it's extremely unlikely you ever get that. Now, the Ravens just lost that combination too. So, I do think that McFadden's a solid developmental player. You need draft picks to pan out. The Giants have invested a lot of capital in finding young players to play important roles. And it's time for them to graduate some of them. Cordell Flott obviously is one that has to step up. We'll see what rookies can do in Tyler Nubin and Andrew Phillips. We need guys like Evan Neal to start developing. But Micah McFadden at the very least has shown the upside that you want to see, and that there is an elite talent there, and it is his ability to shoot the gaps, get into the offensive backfield. It's very unique. Not many players can do that from the linebacker position. I do think that if he can perfect that and really take the right angles, you're going to see him make some damn nice plays next year, especially when quarterbacks are rolling out and play action and stuff like that, and he's being the aggressor and rushing the passer. I think he can make some good stuff happen for this defense. So, yeah, of course, you always think about other players and what they could do for you, but I think McFadden's a solid player, and I think he's going to do some good stuff. And then Isaiah Simmons, that's kind of money linebacker. This guy can play everywhere. He's sideline to sideline athleticism. He's got speed. He's got strength. He can cover, stop the run. He can be your unicorn. That's what he was always meant to be coming out of college. He never really adapted to that, obviously, during his time with Arizona. But you bring him back on a really, really cheap, almost veteran minimum deal, and Simmons really has the upside to be a nice asset for this Giants team. And I do think that at the end of the day, he will be an important piece, especially if there's any injuries. He can step in and play that key role. But we saw him make some nice plays last year. I think he's starting to come into his own a little bit, and we got him on such a cheap contract. He's a really nice depth piece to have. You're not going to find a better depth piece than Isaiah Simmons on most teams, so especially at linebacker. So I do think that our linebacker group is pretty strong for the most part.
I completely agree with you, and I also did have it wrong, have to correct myself here. PFF did have the Giants linebacker core at number 5 in the NFL, which I think is completely justified, and I do appreciate them giving respect to the Giants here in that ranking, because like I said, I think Okereke is a top 10 linebacker in the NFL. I think Micah McFadden is an excellent linebacker for your number 2 starter. He does a lot of things against the run. Sure, he's not the best in coverage. You don't need him to be as your second off-ball linebacker in a defensive scheme. And then, like I said, having Isaiah Simmons rotate in there as your coverage linebacker, this was a really rock-solid unit and one of the ones that I am most confident in going into 2024 for the New York Giants. So I think big things are ahead for this Giants defense. I expect them to improve rather significantly under Shane Bowen compared to Wink Martindale. Wink Martindale did a lot of things well. Wink Martindale did a lot of things that kind of held the team back in other facets of the game. So it was kind of a live or die by the Wink Martindale system over the past couple of years. Now I think that it's going to be more so generated through the talent on the roster rather than the scheme, the defensive production that is. So I'm hoping for some major strides forward from Okereke, McFadden, Simmons, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, all of these guys that we have on this defense. It is a good defense, at least talent-wise, but it's just going to be on Shane Bowen to tie it all together, see if those young guys could take that developmental step in his scheme and really just put a good unit on the field to hopefully take some of the pressure off of a Giants offense that has struggled in a historically bad fashion over the past decade or so. So the New York Giants, love Okereke, love what they're building on the defensive side of the ball, and really have a lot of confidence in this linebacker group. But that pretty much does it. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening at Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. And go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, we'll catch you all in the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.